My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 32 years old, and for nearly a decade, the Army had been my second home. I had survived freezing nights, endless marches, and memories that still followed me into my dreams. But nothing prepared me for the phone call I received 4 days before my younger brother's wedding. It was late evening when my phone started ringing. I smiled when I saw my mother's name on the screen, expecting questions about my flight or whether I had packed enough clothes. Instead, the moment I answered, I heard something strange in her voice. "Ethan, there's something we need to ask you." She hesitated, as if the words themselves were too heavy to say. A few seconds later, my father took the phone. "Son, your brother's wedding is going to be very formal. His fiance's family has put a lot into this event. We think it would be better if you came in a regular suit." For a moment, I didn't understand what he meant. Then he added quietly, "Please don't wear your uniform." The room around me suddenly felt silent. That uniform had been part of my life for years. It had traveled with me across deserts and mountains. It carried medals earned through sacrifice and the names of friends who never made it back home. Yet now, my own family wanted me to leave it hanging in a closet. My parents insisted that guests might focus too much on me instead of the bride and groom. They said they didn't want any awkward conversations or unwanted attention. I listened without interrupting, staring out of my apartment window into the dark city below. The truth was, I knew exactly where this request had come from. My brother Ryan had fallen in love with a woman whose family lived in a world completely different from ours. They owned luxury businesses, hosted expensive parties, and cared deeply about appearances. My mother had spent months trying to fit into that world, terrified of saying or doing the wrong thing. And somehow, somewhere along the way, my service had become something inconvenient. "I'll think about it," I finally said. But deep down, as I ended the call and looked toward the garment bag hanging near my bedroom door, I already knew what my answer would be. Because some things in life are simply too important to hide. The morning of the wedding arrived cold and gray. I stood alone in my hotel room, staring at my reflection while sunlight slipped through the curtains. On the bed beside me lay two choices: a black suit I had bought years ago and the uniform that had become part of who I was. For several minutes, I simply looked at them. Then, without another thought, I reached for the uniform. I buttoned it slowly, the way I had done before deployments, ceremonies, and farewells. Every medal, every ribbon carried a story. Stories of fear, courage, and people whose laughter I could still hear in my head. As I adjusted the collar, one thought kept returning to me. I wasn't wearing this for attention. I was wearing it because it represented years of my life that I could never erase. An hour later, my taxi rolled through the gates of the wedding venue. The place looked like something from a movie. Tall stone walls surrounded perfectly trimmed gardens, and expensive cars lined the entrance. Guests in elegant dresses and tailored suits filled the courtyard, holding glasses of champagne and greeting one another with practiced smiles. The moment I stepped out of the car, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations slowed. People turned their heads. Some smiled politely, while others whispered to the person standing beside them. I kept walking, pretending not to notice. Inside the hall, I spotted my parents near the front row. My mother's expression changed the second she saw me. She quickly walked over, lowering her voice. "Ethan, you actually wore it." There was disappointment in her eyes, but also worry. Before I could answer, the music began, signaling the start of the ceremony. The wedding itself was beautiful. Ryan stood at the altar, nervous but happy, while his bride walked toward him under a canopy of white flowers. For a while, everything felt normal. People laughed, cameras flashed, and the couple exchanged vows as the afternoon sun poured through the stained glass windows. But even as everyone celebrated, I couldn't ignore the strange feeling growing inside me. At the reception, hundreds of lights illuminated the ballroom. Guests filled their plates, the band played soft music, and waiters moved from table to table. I sat quietly with my family, speaking only when someone asked me a question. Yet every time I looked around the room, I noticed something unusual. A few guests, people I had never met before, kept glancing in my direction. An older man near the back studied the medals on my chest. A woman standing beside the bar seemed to recognize something about me. Across the room, another guest nodded slightly as our eyes met. I had no idea who they were, and I certainly had no idea that before the night was over, those strangers would change everything. Dinner had just ended, and the ballroom was glowing under giant crystal chandeliers. Guests laughed over desserts, children ran between tables, and the band was preparing for the next song. For everyone else, it was just another wedding celebration. But for me, something felt different. I noticed the older man from across the room stand up from his seat. He looked to be in his 70s, with silver hair and a straight posture that age had failed to bend. At first, I thought he was heading for the exit. Then another person stood. A woman near the bar slowly placed her glass on the counter and turned toward me. Seconds later, a third guest rose from his chair. Then a fourth. Within moments, 12 people scattered around the ballroom were standing in complete silence, all looking in my direction. The music stopped. Conversations faded. More than 100 guests turned to see what was happening. The older man walked toward my table, and the others followed behind him. Nobody understood why, least of all me. My mother gripped the edge of her chair while my father stared at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. When the group finally reached my table, the older man stopped a few steps away and offered his hand. "My name is Daniel Brooks," he said. "I served many years ago." He glanced at the medals on my uniform before continuing. "I recognized them the moment you walked into this room." One by one, the others introduced themselves. Some had served overseas. Some had lost friends they still talked about decades later. One woman had worked as a battlefield medic. Another man carried injuries hidden beneath his suit. None of them had planned for this meeting. They had come to celebrate a wedding, only to discover someone carrying the same memories they had spent years trying to explain to people who could never truly understand. For the first time that day, I no longer felt alone. The room remained silent as Daniel asked my brother if he could say something. Ryan looked around the ballroom, then took the microphone from the band and handed it to him. Daniel faced the crowd. "There are people among us," he began, "who quietly carry burdens most of us will never see. They don't ask for applause, and they don't wear these medals for attention. They wear them because every ribbon represents sacrifice, loss, and courage." Nobody moved. He paused before speaking again. "Tonight is about love and family, but family should never ask someone to hide the very things that shaped their life." The words hit the room like a wave. I looked toward my parents. My mother's eyes had filled with tears, and my father sat frozen, realizing the mistake they had made. Across the hall, guests who had barely noticed me earlier were now seeing something completely different. Then Ryan stood up. Without saying a word, he walked across the ballroom and stopped beside me. In front of everyone, he placed his hand on my shoulder. "I'm proud to call him my brother," he said. For a moment, nobody reacted. Then, from somewhere near the back of the room, applause began. Slowly, table after table joined in until the entire ballroom was on its feet. The sound echoed off the walls, louder and louder until it felt impossible to tell where it had started. My mother stepped forward first and wrapped her arms around me. My father followed, struggling to find the right words. But he didn't need to say much. Sometimes, silence carries more meaning than an apology ever could. The rest of the evening unfolded in a way nobody had expected. Guests came over to talk, to listen, and to share stories of their own families. The distance that had existed all day slowly disappeared. As the celebration continued, I looked around the room and realized something important. People spend too much time trying to fit into places where they believe they belong. They hide pieces of themselves to make others comfortable. But the truth is simple. The people who truly love you will never ask you to hide who you are. And as I stood there with my family, surrounded by strangers who no longer felt like strangers, I understood that some battles are not fought on distant fields. Sometimes, the hardest battles happen much closer to home, and sometimes, they end not with anger, but with understanding.